Rome. Oh, Rome is fun. Little background before we jump in. Rome has a long, complicated, and bloody history, which I highly encourage everybody to go and, read up on. I'm a particular fan of Mary Beard's work. She's a British academic and just wacky personality. The important stuff that I want to focus on with Rome is initially it is a rival to Greece. Greece was obviously a major cultural center of the Eastern Mediterranean, and it was the hip and happening place to be. Italy and Rome, right next door, always felt, enough about Greece. What's so great about them? And as tends to happen in history, over time, Greece started having some problems. Politically, Greece was, you could say, on a decline. And this coincided with, and was perhaps accelerated by, the rise of Rome. This is, as if you couldn't tell just by the Latin words, this is, the Mediterranean basin, but this is also the extent of the Roman Empire under Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Well, sort of the first Roman emperor. Augustus declared himself emperor. He was the nephew of Julius Caesar. He was sort of the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He, after Caesar, who won a lot of wars as a general, came back, he established himself in Rome, kind of declared himself emperor. He was killed. These things happen. Through a bit of a long and somewhat bloody jostling for power, which was initially split among 3 different people. And that never really works when you take a massive amount of power and say, well, okay, you get a share, you get a share, you get a share. What's that going to tend to do? One of those 3 is going to say, well, I would really like to be in charge of those 2 too. And that's what happens. And that gives you the story of Antony and Cleopatra and all that. Antony and Cleopatra had a power base in, Egypt. And they opposed Rome with, at the time his name was Octavian. And they went to war. Octavian wins. He got rid of the other guy pretty easily, the 3rd guy, and he declared himself emperor. And he goes about establishing, or trying to establish, a unifying Roman culture. Now, anybody looking at this map, what's the main challenge in establishing a unifying Roman culture to support the new emperor? What's the big challenge here? Yeah. There's too much land. It's great to be an emperor over a lot of people, but if those people are different, that's a pain. That's difficult. Rome had very large ambitions in general. They were always going places and saying, "You're conquered." And sometimes they would really do it and kill people. For the most part, however, They were after a place was conquered, they were really pretty good about working with those people. They were really very political, very diplomatic. They said, okay, you got your cultures, you got your different ways of doing things, of talking, of running things. That's fine. Keep it. Just send us taxes and all is good. All of these little squiggly lines are roads built by the Roman Empire. Roman Empire understood, as people today understand, communication is power. If you can be in touch with someone, you can control them. So they built a lot of roads. And the phrase, all roads lead to Rome, is not exactly an exaggeration. Those roads were initially, primarily, so that tax collectors could get back to Rome to bring them the money. It's a good investment, you know. Nobody likes building roads and infrastructure and all that stuff, but if the roads are used to bring you money, yeah. But there's only so much that can do. There's only so much you can pull people to your side if you can get to them and even give them a degree of freedom. You still have to, well, the phrase is win hearts and minds. So you go about trying to create a culture that will bring people around to you. Art is one of those ways. This is a Roman statue of the Greek god Hercules. I know, it's like looking in a mirror. The Romans did an awful lot of, well, the crass word would be copying or stealing the cultures that they come into contact with, particularly their old rival, Greece. But they saw it as a way, since it was so already diversified, they saw it as a way that they could use to get people on their side. If you prove to people that you're not really overturning the old order, you're just improving it, they'll go along with you a little bit better. But they don't want to let go of their gods. Quite literally, the Greeks just, well, the Romans just took Greek gods and renamed them. Now, this isn't entirely an original move. Quite honestly, a lot of the Greek gods had antecedents in, or precedents rather, in other cultures around the Eastern Mediterranean and Babylonian basins. But they're not exercising a terrific degree of originality here. You know, they didn't even bother to rename Apollo. How difficult is that? The other names, Aphrodite becomes Venus, Poseidon becomes Neptune, Hera becomes Juno, Zeus becomes Jupiter, also sometimes called Jove in Virgil. It gets a little hard to follow through because there's already such a large cast of characters, and when they all change names, it's a little confusing. But just know that it was Rome trying to keep everybody familiar, but still move them over to a Roman identity. This is Caesar Augustus, also known initially as Octavian. This is how he liked being portrayed. Noble, heroic. Notice the haircut. The haircut. It's a little thing, the history of haircuts. Julius Caesar was a general. He was a man of war. he made a big splash when he came back to Rome after all those years abroad fighting by having short hair. Because a warrior with long hair, well, you know, anybody ever seen a fight on the schoolyard? Long hair can get pulled. Caesar comes back with short hair, can't really get pulled. Augustus, Octavian, apes that. Says, well, that's a good idea. That's dignified. It's also less luxurious. Long hair at the time would have been seen as a sign of somebody who is, you know, just a little fancy, a little too gentle, a little too soft. The Roman aesthetic has to be active, serious, and practical. You can see him, he's not just standing around being pretty, he seems to be directing something. Look at that stare. The man with a mission. He's getting things done. Very pragmatic people, the Romans. You will notice also that, you know, still a remarkably good-looking guy. This guy, a little less so, roughly the same period. This is a common Roman. One of the things that Rome tends to bring in is that practical, realistic perspective, where not everybody is that pretty. You know, Hercules, yeah, you got to make him pretty. Augustine, yeah, you got to make him pretty. He's the boss. Everybody else, let's be realistic about this. Let's be honest about this. This is what people look like. You know, the older I get, the less ugly this guy seems to me because I'm starting to see myself. He kind of looks like Larry David. I don't know if you watched Curb Your Enthusiasm. But, you know, I think we can all agree that this is your average Tinder profile pic, and when you show up for the blind date, that's who's sitting across the table. Practicality, realism, these are Roman virtues, not the long hair and the prettying up. That was considered a little decadent, a little too Greek. Many people will look at Roman culture and say, not so much with the art, but damn, they knew how to do engineering. The toilet, a Roman invention. Indoor plumbing began in Rome. Can you think of something more practical? Something we can all get behind or on top of? This is not a toilet, but it's what makes it run. This is an aqueduct. This is actually in France, built a little bit after the time of Augustine, but it's still of that period. You will notice the color. This is a photograph. This thing still stands. This is a Pont de Garde aqueduct. Romans knew their engineering. They built stuff that lasts. One of the reasons why we have the Roman Colosseum and all of these old buildings from that era is they knew how to build stuff. A building, an aqueduct, this is practical stuff. This stuff lasts, this stuff matters, and they put a lot of focus and energy into it. It's not just pretty, it has a purpose. Notice also the simplicity of the design. The aesthetic is notable. It's not trying to be too fancy. It's just very simple, very regular, very almost unimpressive in its staidness. But with that, there's some dignity. Whenever you see a lot of government buildings, even some like you pass by the old courthouse building on Madison Square Park. A lot of Roman architecture. They call it like neoclassical, but it tends to be very simple design. That idea of dignity, which tends to confer a sense of power. Architecture can convey that. Architecture is architecture can be very beautiful, but it is also a way of exerting power over people. The realm of the Roman Empire was massive. It was very diverse. It was trying to bring everybody together. It was an attempt to unite everybody, and by that I mean, generally speaking, property owners and men, everybody under a single banner of Roman as a single identity. The complication with that, of course, we've already discussed. It's very difficult to do that with all this. How do you do that? Well, military intimidation, that helps. Giving stuff away, that helps. They did all of it. But an awful lot of what they did was in the realm of the arts. And an awful lot of that can be classified, almost, as propaganda. Using the arts to further your political goals. That doesn't necessarily mean that the art itself is garbage, but it casts a certain quality over it that you need to be aware of while you're reading it, because it's very easy to get swept up in stuff. In a political season, you see a lot of campaign ads waving flags and having inspiring pictures, and everybody looks so damn good. Like Octavian. When they really look more like the common Roman. It's very easy to get swept up in that stuff, and sometimes it feels good. Like going to a sporting event, you want to get swept away. Going to a blockbuster movie, like, yeah, take me on a ride. But understanding what it's doing, understanding the dynamics, the little sales pitch it's making to you, that gives you power. You can still appreciate it, you can still have fun, you can still say, wow, that's really something. But just be aware of the internal messages.